Welcome, age of vintage society. Rock Hudson was everything a romantic leading man could be in the 1950s and 60s. Hunky, clean-cut, extraordinarily handsome, so much so that he ascended to a place where he was considered the king of Hollywood and lived in a Beverly Hills mansion nicknamed the Castle, but the actor paid a heavy personal price for his preeminence. Why Rock Hudson's coming out marked a turning point of Hollywood history. Make sure to watch the video until the end and leave your thoughts in the comments. If you are new here, join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Age of Vintage channel. Rock Hudson, Hollywood's most eligible bachelor. Rock Hudson was one of the last stars of Hollywood's golden era, but he was forced to keep his private life a secret, concealing his sexuality to protect his leading man image. Hudson lived a double life as a Hollywood heartthrob and a closeted homosexual man. Deeply closeted in an era where an openly homosexual man could never be a celluloid hero, Hudson, a matinee idol of the First Order who wooed Elizabeth Taylor, Lauren Bacall, Gina Lollobrigida and Doris Day on screen, and starred most successfully and famously in films like Giant and Pillow Talk, spent his life and career hiding in plain sight. That's the narrative thrust of this on-screen, off-screen examination of Hudson. Long before he landed in Hollywood, he understood that if he wanted to be accepted, the very essence of who he was would have to be edited out of the frame. And that's exactly what Hudson did, until the public disclosure of his AIDS diagnosis shortly before his death in 1985 at age 59 cast him in a new role as the face of a global and much misunderstood pandemic. It was a turning point in the public awareness of the AIDS epidemic. Hudson's death made people realise AIDS is a disease, not a moral affliction. It used to be unthinkable for a Hollywood star to come out as homosexual, but if you stayed in the closet, you could be blackmailed. Celebrities often faced serious personal consequences for being forced to live a double life. A good example of that is Rock Hudson. In the 1950s and 60s, he was considered an all-American hetero heartthrob, the leading man in romantic melodramas like All That Heaven Allows and Magnificent Obsession, and other romantic comedies. He starred with James Dean and Elizabeth Taylor. In the 70s he starred in the TV series Macmillan and Wife as the police commissioner of San Francisco. Hollywood needed someone glamorous in theatre marquees, so it took two of the world's natural wonders, the Rock of Gibraltar and the Hudson River, and baptised the 6'4" truck driver from Winnetka, Illinois, with a moniker crafted from the two sites, and a star was born. The first matinee idol of his kind, Rock Hudson, ushered in the era of the earthy He-Man. Hudson had a traumatic childhood. He was born Roy Shearer Jr. on November 17, 1925, in Winnetka, Illinois. His father abandoned the family when he was a child, and his mother, Catherine, remarried when Hudson was 8. His stepfather, Wallace Fitzgerald, was an abusive alcoholic who forced the young boy to take his last name. He was a harshly critical man, ridiculing Hudson's speech and behaviour, forbidding him from playing with toys he considered too feminine, and mocking the teens' early interest in drama. From an early age he learned that you could talk about pretty much anything, except what you truly felt and what you really wanted, like a father. Growing up, Hudson did not excel academically, but had a certain charisma that made him popular among classmates. In 1944, Hudson joined the US Navy and served in the Philippines. Shortly after his discharge in 1946, he decided to move to Hollywood, California, to pursue an acting career. 6 feet 4 inches tall, the handsome 21-year-old had no professional training, but had set his sights on becoming an actor. While he found work as a truck driver, most of his free time was spent hanging around the studios and handing out headshots to studio executives. It's not surprising that people soon began to take notice of the aspiring actor with his good looks and charm. In 1947, Hudson was introduced to agent Henry Wilson, who was known for his roster of attractive men. After meeting Hudson, Wilson saw the potential for his greatest creation yet. Roy Fitzgerald became Rock Hudson. His agent transformed him into a Hollywood legend. Hudson had no professional training as an actor, which proved a difficult feat to overcome. Hudson was given a complete makeover, with Wilson hiring coaches to help the aspiring actor lower his voice and present the highly masculine physicality that helped launch what became known as Hollywood's beefcake craze. Within a year, Hudson had landed his first role and was soon put under contract. Rumours about Hudson's sexuality soon swirled. His relationship with Wilson helped fuel the rumours, as many had long assumed that the agent's stable of actors were required to sleep with him to secure support for their careers. In an era when homosexuality was still a crime and almost entirely taboo, Wilson made little attempt to hide his sexuality and was frequently spotted at those Los Angeles bars. Hudson, however, was much more discreet, and although his closest friends and co-workers knew he was attracted with men, revealing that to public would have ended his career. In 1954, Hudson got his big break with a leading role in Douglas Sirk's Magnificent Obsession. His newfound stardom after years of struggling was a welcome relief, but it brought with it increased scrutiny of his private life. Like many other young actors, Hudson had played along with the powerful studio publicity machine, going on arranged dates with starlets and giving coy interviews to journalists about his relationship status. But when publications such as Life magazine began running stories about why the hunky star was still single as he neared 30, Hudson and Wilson began to worry. Hudson married Phyllis Gates, an aspiring actress, in 1955. Unbeknownst to Phyllis, their marriage was arranged by Hudson's agent, Wilson, to keep up appearances. His brief marriage to Phyllis Gates was meant to keep scandal sheets at bay. What is known is that the public was openly wondering why Rock Hudson wasn't married, and Confidential magazine was intent on exposing him. Henry Wilson knew that there was only one way to silence all of the rumours about Hudson's private life. It was time for Rock to get married, and fast. Gates would later claim that she'd no idea that Hudson was homosexual before they married, but those close to Hudson were convinced that it had all been arranged by Wilson. The marriage lasted for only 3 years. While Hudson was in Italy filming 1957's A Farewell to Arms, the couple divorced. Hudson would never remarry, and he would soon end his business relationship with Wilson. In late 1955, Hudson had just wrapped work on his most important film yet, Giant. The movie would earn him his only Academy Award nomination and saw the beginning of a lifelong friendship with co-star Elizabeth Taylor. Homosexuality was never portrayed on the big screen during the old Hollywood days, but many of Hudson's roles often depicted a man in the midst of an identity crisis. Many of the characters Hudson played were deeply conflicted. Whether Hudson was playing the hero, the lover, or even the science experiment, many of the characters were, on some level, conflicted. Douglas Sirk, who directed Hudson in such films as Magnificent Obsession, All That Heaven Allows, and Written on the Wind, certainly knew the score about Hudson and nudged his leading man toward characters who are in the throes of an identity crisis. Given how Hudson grappled with pretending to be a completely different person to his public in real life, he was most effective in these film roles. Douglas Sirk and Rock Hudson worked together several times, and they both had a close friendship. Hudson described his bond with Sirk as very much a father-son type of relationship. "He was like old Dad to me, and I was like a son to him, I think," Hudson said. "When you're scared and new and you're trying to figure out this thing, and suddenly an older man will reach out and say, 'There, it's okay.' That was Douglas Sirk." Thanks to a series of light-hearted romantic comedies with Doris Day, Hudson had become one of Hollywood's biggest stars and hottest heartthrobs. But by the end of the 1960s, Hudson had begun aging out of his leading man roles, and he increasingly turned his attention to television, starring in the long-running series Macmillan and Wife. Although Henry Wilson was instrumental in starting Hudson's career, working with him came at a hefty price. Wilson's reputation had never been the greatest, but by the 1960s it was getting even worse. Studios became increasingly more reluctant to sign his clients. Hudson stood by Wilson and continued to have a professional and personal relationship with him for years, but by 1966, Wilson was becoming a weight around his neck. Hudson fired him. Prior to his diagnosis with AIDS, Rock Hudson was already starting to develop severe health problems in the early 80s. He was a heavy smoker and drinker, which were likely the main contributors to his issues. In 1982, when starring on the short-lived detective show The Devlin Connection, he had a massive heart attack that shut down production, and Hudson had to have quintuple bypass surgery. By the time Hudson recovered from surgery and filming resumed, viewers lost interest in The Devlin Connection, and the show was cancelled. Rock Hudson's last major role was on the soap opera Dynasty. He was intended to be a leading character, but soon it became obvious that his health was failing him. Hudson was becoming increasingly frailer, losing weight, and soon his speech began to suffer. After 14 episodes of Dynasty, Hudson's character had to be written off the show. In June 1984, Hudson went to visit a doctor about an irritation on his neck. The irritation turned out to be a lesion and a sign of Kaposi sarcoma, a cancerous tumour that affects AIDS patients. Rock Hudson was diagnosed with AIDS on June 5, 1984. A year later, on July 25, 1985, he publicly announced that he was suffering from the disease, becoming one of the first celebrities to do so, as well as one of the first to disclose his homosexuality. His openness was a catalyst for public awareness of the worldwide epidemic. Hudson spent the remainder of his life surrounded by friends and family. He died from AIDS-related complications on October 2, 1985, at the age of 59, in Beverly Hills, California. He was the first major celebrity to die from an AIDS-related illness. Today, Rock Hudson is remembered not only for his legacy as a talented screen actor, but for his courageous choice to go public about his AIDS diagnosis. Hudson's old celebrity friends like Elizabeth Taylor and Doris Day stood by him. The public was sitting up and paying attention. People were coming out and supporting AIDS benefits and fundraisers. At the beginning of Rock Hudson's life was a covert operation, if you will. So much of his life had to be interior, and he didn't feel free to express so much. The fact that he had these great ambitions to be an actor. He never told any of his closest friends back in Winnetka, Illinois, about that. And similarly, you know, all these issues in reference to his sexuality were certainly something that, today, we have these dialogues very freely about issues of sexuality. But back in the 1940s and 1950s, when rock was arriving on the scene in Hollywood, it was a very different culture, as we know. And all of that was repressed, and he could not say any of that out loud. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you're new here, and if you want to support my work, please visit my Patreon page. Now it is your turn. What do you think about the life and legacy of Rock Hudson? We were thinking how painful it must have been for him to be one of Hollywood's leading men, one of the most, quote, eligible bachelors, while being a different person inside.